I graduated from Center in 2002, so it's been a minute. I graduated with my my BS in psychobiology. I didn't have a minor. And then from there, I went straight to graduate school. And I went to graduate school for clinical psychology, PhD program. And I went to Loma Linda University, which is in Southern California. That was a major cultural shift. I'm born and raised in Kentucky. So having spent 22 years there and then going straight to Southern California I might as well have come from another country. It was a culture shock, but it was also awesome. I love California. Um, and so I was in that program. It was on paper at the time a 6 year program. It took me 7 years because I was slow on my dissertation and I also added some additional education. I also added some classes on school psychology as well. I had actually wanted to work in a school and do assessment. That's what I loved. But when I graduated, so to get a PhD in psychology, you have to finish your education classes, then you have to do a 1 year internship. And then you have, in many states, you then have to do, if you want to be licensed, you have to do a year postdoctoral fellowship. And if you're familiar with what's called the resident match, that internship match is basically the very similar process where you apply all over the country and then you get matched to your site. And so you often have to move. So my internship was in Erie, Pennsylvania, and then my fellowship was in Baltimore, Maryland. And I went to Baltimore because I had a strong interest in public policy. And I wanted to be in the Baltimore, Washington corridor to just be kind of closer to that environment. But it was also the recession when I graduated. And so one thing to be aware of is that there will always be sort of circumstances around you that you don't have control over. And so the economy was one of them. And so I had a really difficult time finding a job, paying that at what I wanted, doing what I wanted to do in the area that I wanted to live. But I had a lot of loans, I had massive, huge, major, ginormous, soul crushing loans. And so I was like, well, the public service loan forgiveness program also started the year before, 2 years before I graduated. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go do that. And so I needed a job that would offer that. And so the best job that I found that kind of hit all of the necessary buckets was in Kansas City, Missouri at a children's hospital. And because I always knew I wanted to work with kids, I should have mentioned that part somewhere in the beginning. And so that's where I went. And so I am still in Kansas City, Missouri. I worked at that children's hospital until my loans got paid off. So I worked there for 13 years. And then I left last December because I never really wanted to work in a children's hospital, but it was close enough to what I needed and what I wanted to go do it. And so then when I got my loans done, I was like, cool, I don't have to be here anymore. So I left. And so now, one of the things that I was able to get in the children's hospital was a lot of access and training about advocacy, which has gotten me back and connected to that policy and politics vibe that I had wanted the whole time when I wanted to be in Baltimore, D.C. So I left and I am now working primarily as an independent contractor, which means I'm kind of like a free agent. And so I'm contracting with a private practice because right now, clinical skills, therapy in particular, are my most marketable skill. So I make the most of my pay working with a private practice. I'm doing adults now, which is actually really fun. It's called the Black Girl Doctor. So I focus on Black women. And then I'm the legislative chair for my state psychological association. So I get to do a lot of advocacy work. And so I started my own LLC. And so I'm currently sort of rebuilding Dr. Beck 2.0, which is my dream goal is to fully move into the advocacy sector. But I'm learning that even though I have a lot of skills, folks sometimes just look at your degree, and I don't have a political science degree or a public health degree. And so I am working on sort of filling in what needs to be seen for recruiters and other folks to know the skills that I have in that environment. So we're working in transition. And I would say sort of the gist of all of that, because I'm a mid-career psychologist and a middle-aged person, is you don't really have to know what you want to be when you grow up all the time. You can change. And so if you would have asked me when I was in your shoes, if I could have predicted any of this, I would have laughed and said, absolutely not. So It's been a quite an adventure to follow the opportunities as they have arisen, and it's been fun.
Should I go now?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Dr. Beck, I love hearing your story. We definitely have some similarities. We did not, I, I'm older, so I graduated. Hello, students. I'm so excited to speak with you. And it was, again, it's wonderful hearing Dr. Beck's story. So I graduated from Center in 1997. So I was there a little bit earlier. That probably sounds probably before many of you were born. So I got my BS in psychology and I had a minor in education. And then, so following that, I did not go far, but I went to the University of Kentucky. It's interesting though, thinking back to where you all are because the career, so I also wanted to work with kids, but I had not heard of what I ended up doing, which was school psychology. Dr. Beck, you mentioned that. So I had not heard of school psychology until I was a senior at Center and I was doing an internship over at Danville High School. And my supervisor said, oh, I was talking to her, I was like, I'm not sure what I want to do. And I'd done all the career stuff. And she's like, you should be a school psychologist. I said, what is that? I had never heard of it. And so she explained it to me, and it did seem like a good fit. And so that's what I ended up doing. And that's what I am still doing. But like Dr. Beck, I've done it in a quite a few different ways, and I'll try to explain kind of my path and have it make sense for you all. So, upon graduating from Center, I went to UK, and UK has a couple different programs. We have what's called the Education Specialist Program. And so I initially entered that program. And because I knew that I wanted to work with kiddos and I wanted to work in the school. So that's a 3-year program, and you get your master's along the way. So I did that. And then I started working in the public schools, and I had three elementary schools there in Fayette County or Lexington. And I sort of, again, you just don't know your path. I had a school that had a lot of kiddos with autism, and so that just it wasn't what I intended, but that ended up being sort of a passion and a specialty of mine. Um, and um, and then when I went back to school later to get my PhD, that ended up being my dissertation as well. So, and sort of I'd say, I wouldn't say my life's work, but in an area of work and passion that I'm done. I also, in that time, I moved in 2004, I think, to the Louisville area and continued working in the public schools in a different avenue. I was what's called a this term is not really used as much anymore. It was this is over 20 years ago, called a low incidence consultant. So I worked across the school district, and this job was just, I loved this job. I worked for 19 schools, from preschool to high school, and worked with kiddos with from autism, developmental disabilities, hearing impairment, visual impairment, and did a lot of community work, and had a lot of resources. I was blessed with a lot of resources. And so that was just a wonderful time in my career that I was able to work with families and did a lot. And so finished my PhD while I was doing that. Don't ever do that. You'll find out later. I tell my current students, do not work full time while you're working on your PhD. Had two kids in the meantime, so don't do that. Um, so I did that, finished my PhD, and I loved my job working in the schools. Absolutely loved it. As Dr. Beck said, loved working with kids, loved working with families. But in 2010, an opportunity presented itself at UK. My mentor contacted me and said, hey, come help us out for a year. Take a leave of absence from the schools and you can do your licensure as a psychologist, because at this time I'm working in the schools. I'm what's called a certified school psychologist. So I'm not licensed psychologist. So I said you can get your licensure with us and everything will be good. And then you can go back to the schools because that's where you want to be. So 15 years later, I'm still at UK. That's the moral of the story, right? So I get to UK and I'm there a year, and they asked me to stay on for a year two. And then I loved it so much. And so I'm still at UK. So my lecturer position has turned into, now I'm what's called a clinical associate professor. So I have a wonderful job where I get to really focus in on what's called the clinical training of the students. I do research, but it's a small part of my job. I Right now I'm sort of really honing in on grant work. As if I do extra stuff, that's what I'm doing, which we just got a wonderful grant. But my big part is teaching, which I love. I love to teach and teach students and work on their practicum and their internship sites. So that is the big part of me. So again, year 15 at UK in the school psychology program. So we are training students. That's what I do right now. We are training students to be school psychologists. So I hope that makes sense. I feel like Dr. Beck, you've been definitely all over the place. I've stayed very centrally, but I've definitely done some kind of different things with my career. Again, I probably would never have thought I would have done this, but that's the great thing about psychology. There are so many different avenues and ways that you can keep yourself all of you are probably very curious, and there's so many ways you can do advocacy and work with families and work with children or adults. And it's been a great career for me. Again, as definitely as a middle-aged woman, I'm still very passionate, which is, I think, all you can ask for at this point. So, yeah.
This time, I'm going to turn it over to you guys to ask whatever questions are on your minds. So just speak up whenever you ask a question. Yes, ma'am.
Can you all hear me? Okay. So I know you talked both about licensing, and can you talk like just a little bit more about that and like what that process is and what the different licenses are that you have to obtain to like work with clients, just things like that.
You want to go first, Dr. Beck?
Sure. Yeah. Ironically, I was actually looking at licensure information this morning, so I got fresh thoughts. Um, so one of the things about psychology and really any healthcare profession is the licensure process is regulated by the state that you're in. There's not for psychology one national sort of licensure thing. There are national certifications, but not national licensure. And so though you're not necessarily going to know the state that you're going to live in, at the point when you get your license, if you have an idea, it's helpful to look at that information, like as you're training, because it'll let you know like what it requires in terms of your education. Any training program that is what's called APA accredited or American Psychological Association accredited will basically offer what's necessary for the core pieces of your education. But where you're going to see differences is particularly with after you graduate. So that postdoctoral fellowship. Um, Back when we graduated, pretty much all states required a fellowship that you had to have, which was like 1,000 to 2,000 extra hours of clinical supervised training after you get your PhD. That is changing. And I don't know how many states still do and don't, but that will make a difference. You also, in pretty much every state, have to take what's called the EPPP. I forgot what it stands for. I don't know, examination of professional psychology practice. I don't know, something. It's one of those things. It's a terrible test that you have to like study like crazy for. And then after you take it, you completely erase it and it's trauma from your brain. So that's, I don't remember what it's called. And so you have to get a certain score. And then some states also have what's called the state jurisprudence test, which means you have to know the specific laws for practice in that state. And so that's a separate thing that you have to pass. And yeah. And also, each state dictates what degree can be licensed in the state. So, like in Missouri, currently, school psychologists are not eligible to sit for to apply for what would be then called licensed psychology. They used to be, but then it changed, and I don't know why. But that's currently the state of affairs in Missouri, which is where I am. Um, but again, things are always changing. Like right now, there's a lot of conversation about master's level psychology, and if what sort of parameters can folks have with a master's in psychology that's not school psychology or like social work or marriage and family therapy, sort of what parameters for licensure and practice can folks have at that level too, because they wouldn't be considered in some states a psychologist, although in some states they are. And so there's a lot of kind of messiness, but main takeaway is it's going to be state by state. So whatever state you want to live in with your license, that's what's going to dictate what you can be and what you can call yourself and what hoops you have to jump through to get to whatever that end goal is.
Yeah, and I'll just add like for our field, so like initially when I was working, I was certified, and this is true basically across the nation. I was a certified. Now again, like in Texas, this is different because they call it license, which is super confusing. But essentially, I was okay to work by the Department of Education as a school psychologist. But then, like what Dr. Beck is saying, as just a general psychologist, that's where it's going to be your state board of psychology or psychology examiners. That's a whole different so that's where like the clinical psychologists and the school, like we all kind of come together. So those are like, but I totally agree. It's state by state. Everyone is different. People, as usual, we have different verbiage. The exams are similar but different. And so, yeah, you certainly, if you know, but the thing that will, as you all, if you're looking at graduate programs, the thing that will keep you more safe is looking for, as Dr. Beck mentioned, that APA accreditation. And then for us, for school psychologists, we also like we have the National Association of School Psychologists, so NASP, and then APA. Like we're like our program, we're NASP accredited or, I'm sorry, NASP approved and APA accredited. So those are things that like any of the programs you're looking at, look for those things. Those are big checkpoints for you all as you move forward that will help you be licensed, because you don't want to go through all that stuff. And then now, not that you can't, right? Not that you can't be licensed, but there's more hoop. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Rebecca? There's just so many more hoops. Those things are going to help you with the hoops along the way of becoming licensed. Because that's what you all want to do. You want to become licensed wherever you are, or again, certified or whatever the verbiage is. And I would agree, definitely knowing Kentucky right now is the as Dr. Beck mentioned, like with your master's in psychology, like if you were looking at clinical psychology right now, there's just a lot there's a lot of different talk about what's going to happen. I don't really know what's going to happen with that. So yeah.
Well, and I would also add too, just to make it even more confusing, one of the good and also hard things about psychology is it's a massive field with lots of different flavors, and the flavors all overlap, and it can be it's confusing for those of us who are in it. So when I trained in California, so much like Dr. Hammond said, I didn't know, like, my mom was just like, you should be a clinical psychologist. So I was at Center, loved psychology, like took AP psychology my senior year of high school, fell in love with it. It was like, oh my gosh, let's do this. Started taking psychology classes at Center, loved it even more. Of course, I'd want to be a pediatrician, but I was like, nope, don't want to do that. Let's do this. And so my mom was like, well, you should be a clinical psychologist. And I was like, okay, like I didn't know. And so as I was in that program, that's when I realized that you could work in a school. So I didn't know what school psychology was until I was already like a couple years into my clinical program, which at that point I had already, signed my life away in blood. Like I wasn't going to like up and change. But where I was, there was a neighboring institution that offered school psychology classes because in California, you just need a school psychology pupil personnel services credential, which is that certification that Dr. Hammond is talking about. And so I could add those classes that rounded out what I was getting in my clinical program to then get that credential. And so I actually worked part-time as a school psychologist in my last year of graduate school, which I would also add, again, working in graduate school is challenging. And so I did that. And again, but it kind of left me an interesting bucket because I don't have my master's or any degree in school psychology. I just had that state specific credential. And I was looking into getting my oh gosh, what is it? NCSP, National School Psych, what is it? Yeah. It's a national certification for school
Yeah,
psychology. It's like, oh,
you're right.
thank you. I was like, I was going to do that so I could try and work in other states, but then I couldn't get a job. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll use this clinical thing I got going on. What my actual full degree is. And because what I had done all my research in graduate school was in pediatric obesity, and I had done a lot of clinical work in obesity as well. So I worked in a school and then I worked in a hospital. Like that's where I did most of my clinical training practicums. And even my internship site was half at a residential treatment program, so really severe sick kids, and it was half in a school district. So it's 2 days in a school district and 3 days a week in a residential treatment facility. So I was like, well, you want to get a lot of background and sort of get your hand in as many buckets of all the different flavors as possible to make yourself as well-rounded and help with the job search. So I was like, all right. So the job that I took at the children's hospital is an obesity treatment program. That's what I went and did. Cause I was like, all right, cool. I can go do that. It's going to pay my loans, pays well enough. Peace. So yeah, it's really messy and confusing. So it's helpful to do what you're doing now, which is to talk to as many people who are in this bucket and in this field and doing this stuff to get as many perspectives and kind of life and career trajectories as possible, because many of us have done it differently. Yeah, and it's confusing.
This is kind of a bit of a personal question, but I was wondering if you all ever struggle with like separating your like work lives and your personal lives, because I know that's something a lot of people struggle with, and it seems like it might be even more prevalent in the psychology field.
Yeah, I mean, we both alluded to trying to work and be in graduate school at the same time. And so, as within any career, so when I worked in a hospital, hospitals are hard because it was also an academic medical center. And so there was research and clinical work and then all this other stuff. And you had eligibility for promotion. So you had to do all this other stuff to show that you were like awesome to get a raise. And so it can be very difficult to balance all the things. And so the two main things that I would talk about, or I would kind of encourage you to think about in this process is one, when you're interviewing for your job, wherever that is, regardless if you do any of this or not, like really pay attention to the culture of the place. Because so much of your balance is going to be dictated by the culture of the environment where you work. You can have the world's best boundaries and be the best at saying no, but if the culture you're in punishes you for doing that, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that. And so you want to be in a place that's going to support balance as much as possible. Those are hard to find, but they do exist. And so that would be my number one recommendation. And then two, as a psychologist, one of the things that we are very well trained in is that if we are not able to take care of ourselves, we are not going to be able to take care of other people. Because so much of what we do directly impacts the outcomes and well-being of other humans. And so it is unethical for us to be unhealthy, and then try and encourage the health of other people. And so trying to fight and maintain that is a priority. And so you get good at doing that with your own internal skill set through your graduate training, but you need an environment that's going to foster that. That's part of why I left the hospital, was I was like, nope, y'all are trying to kill me. I'm out.
I would say that I think that's wonderful advice. And just thinking about for me, like my career path, one of the biggest things that I struggled with early on is pretty similar to what you're saying, Dr. Beck, was saying no, and especially when you have kiddos and families and teachers that I worked with, when they were in need, it was really hard for me to find that balance to be like, oh, I really need to get X done. So I was helping them. And so then I'm staying up, until 3, 4 in the morning, not sleeping, and not eat, all those things. I've really found early in my career that I didn't do a great job of saying no because the needs were so great. So I think, and that's just really hard. And that's sort of the nature of the game. So trying to find a balance of where can you say no? Where can you ask others for help too? I didn't like initially asking others for help, but what I did learn quickly too in my career was it was okay to say, like, I need to find out. It was okay to not always know the answer. So that was okay. But the balance of the paperwork, I think, was initially one of the hardest things for me. And then now the big balance for me in my academic career, and I think I've done a pretty good job. Probably this is, I think, just getting older, but you all know this as students, and you all are younger with this, the technology piece, being able to turn it off. Like I have to, like in the summer, I have to give myself like 2 weeks where I literally don't, like, I'm like, even if I'm not on vacation, but I'm on vacation. And same thing with like emails and stuff. Like I think I'm really good at returning my students' emails, and like text messages, but I do like have to give myself a little bit of a break. So you'll find that in your career too, just because we're so accessible, which is wonderful. I mean, I joke like center, Dr. Beck doesn't have this, but like I first came to center and like I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a computer. That's how old I am. You all, like I did not. That's how old I am. So things have changed so drastically with access, and access is great, but then that can really burn you all out. It can burn you out with having instant access all the time where people can reach you. And then, of course, depending on your clients and what that looks like. But just be really thoughtful about that as you all move forward about setting those boundaries and across the board. I mean, thoughtful with respect to your clients and yourself.
So I know you both have mentioned the flavors of psychology. That's kind of where I am right now with my grad school research and how I want to move forward. And one of the things I find that I struggle with is I am so interested in many areas of psychology, but at the same time, I feel like there's pressure to figure out what grad program I need to get into to set me up to experience all those flavors. So whether it's getting into a grad program or waiting a year to get some experience, what do you all recommend in terms of me getting a taste of all these flavors, but then being able to really hone in on what I want to do?
There is, well, two things. One, I believe you can be a student member of the American Psychological Association. So I would encourage you to think about that because that will give you access to just like materials that are coming out, and you can look at, you have to pay extra money to then join different divisions within APA, which kind of stinks. But I think everything is going to be super cheap for students. And so there's divisions of like consulting psychology and school psychology and clinical psychology and counseling psychology. So that can give you sort of an inside flavor. And depending on what year you are, if you're like a junior or below, then you'll have more time to kind of like sniff that out. If you're a senior, there's also, and I don't remember what it's called, but there are books published by APA that are graduate school guides. If you go on the APA website, like their bookstore, and just look for it's pretty easy to find if you just intuitively look for like students, graduate school, like that sort of thing. And they are really meant to be essentially what it is that you're asking for, like guides for the different existing programs. And I think they're all going to be APA accredited programs if they're going to be in the APA book. That can sort of give you what they offer and what they have and like what those programs are for. But at the end of the day, you're never going to fully know. I mean, I still don't know. And I'm 44 years old and I've been doing this for a long time. Like we're out here figuring it out. And I think that's the part too, because you can make yourself crazy trying to get it right. And if I've learned anything in this journey, it's that right is what you make of it. And so, you eventually have to make a decision, and then go with it. And the world is also changing. I mean, jobs that are available to me now didn't exist when I was in y'all's shoes. So who knows what will be available, when you get through graduate school. So take a look at the research, make your best decision, and then just go for it and you'll figure it out. That's one of the gifts of the PhD is it teaches you how to think. And so you'll figure it out.
Yeah, and I definitely echo everything that Dr. Beck just said. And I think you're just looking for your best match, and yeah, and just don't overthink it and stress too much about it, because there are, there are overlaps, and yeah, and at some point it might even be more fluid than it is now. But yeah, just I think those guidebooks are great. Great option. And if you haven't, just continuing to talk to more professionals about what they do, what does their day look like, if any shadowing, any of those opportunities. And you might have already done all that and still be like, I don't know. And that's okay. It's okay not to know exactly, because you are so young. But just, yeah, if looking for what feels like at this point the closest match. But I've had grad students who, they think they ended up, it's not the right fit. Of course, like I always say, like each of the things are going to have the big hallmark. Like for us as school psychology, like you have to like kids. Like if you don't like kids, it's not the right program for you. If you don't like communicating with others, it's probably not the right field for you. So there's going to be some hallmarks across all of them that you should be able to pinpoint when you talk to a professional. I think that would probably like the help you. But yeah, I agree with Dr. Beck. There's going to be some part about every job that you're not going to love. There's never going to be a perfect fit. Although like I started off, like, I didn't mean to make it sound like all roses, right? That I'm like, oh, I love every part. No, there's certain parts that, of the job that you still are like, well, that's not the most fun. But yeah, I think it's great that you're asking that question, right? That you're at this point thinking it's scary. I'm scared when I talk to like a 12-year-old and they're like, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? That can be scary, right? Does
I
that
would
help at
also
all?
I would also add one thing is to think about is cost. If I could go back and do it all again, I wish that someone had talked to me about loans, because my little 22-year-old infant self was like, oh my God, loans, no problem. Major problem. And so I came out. So I went to Loma Linda University. It's a private Christian school in Southern California, which is about all the trifectas of expense that you can possibly get. So I came out with several $100,000 of loans. And that was more of a monthly payment than I had thought. So that's why I had to be locked into a job that offered the public service loan forgiveness. Now, when you look at the current political environment, loan forgiveness is controversial for whatever reasons. And so right now that program still exists, but by the time you guys are out, I don't know. And so if you can avoid getting massive loans and still be in a program that works for you, by all means, do not incur that debt. It absolutely changed the trajectory of my life. So don't do that if you can avoid it. And I would also add there's even more flavor to the psychology where you don't have to be licensed. So, like, my partner is a community psychologist. So his focus was on research, particularly social justice based research. And so he works in administration. He is in charge of the funding that we have in our local community that goes towards all the community mental health centers. So he hasn't seen a patient since he was in graduate school, but he's still very much a doctoral level psychologist who's never been licensed. So there's lots of ways to be applied to also consider. And there was another question. I saw somebody with your hand up before I started flapping my lips again. Yeah.
To relay a question from a friend that's psych major, education minor, wanting to go into educational psychology. And she was wondering, she was thinking about doing school psychologists as well, but she's heard that they don't actually interact with kids as much and they're more talking with the teachers and other adults with the planning. And so she was wondering if you guys felt like that career like actually allowed you to like establish relationships with the kids themselves.
I think each job is what you make of it. So like when I definitely you will have to talk to adults. So it's impossible not to. But yeah, my role when I worked in Lexington, I had like a caseload of like 25 kids that I saw each week with different groups. But like a school that was like 2 miles down the road, that person didn't see anybody. So like but I wanted to do that. And there was a need. Now, was there a need at that person's school? Yeah. But that's not really what they wanted to do. They were more into the test. Now, I had a big testing. I didn't have a huge testing load, but I had a testing load as well. So you test for special education as well. I did a lot of consultation, but I think now going back, Dr. Beck mentioned this earlier, you got to see when you're looking at jobs, the culture of your job, right? But I have some students right now currently that do a lot of counseling and intervention and groups, some that don't do as much. And you see that. The one good thing about I will sort of talk up my career right now, currently, there are a ton of job openings across the nation. There is a huge need for school psychologists. Like right now in Kentucky, I mean, I think there's like 100 active openings. There's so many openings. And then out beyond, if you don't want to just work in the schools, but I think about like 80% of school psychologists work in the schools. But I think it's what you make of it and where you are, what district and where you work. Like I said, when I worked in Fayette County, I was really heavily involved with kiddos, doing the counseling assessment. When I went to my next school district, I was in Oldham County. I did a lot more with I did a ton with like program evaluation and I did assessment, but I didn't do the direct counseling. And that was my job. So yeah, so I think it's dependent on where you are. So that's sort of seeking out if that's something you're interested in. Ironically, some of my students get in, they're like, oh, I only want to do counseling. They start doing counseling. They're like, I don't like counseling as much. So they like the assessment a little bit more. But I think it's any job is kind of what you make of it.
And I would just also add, anytime you're working with kids in period, you have to be able to work with adults because kids don't come to you alone. And you are working in that dyad with parent and child, and you have to be comfortable with that in whatever pediatric setting you're in. Yeah, it makes it harder.
Specifically for Dr. Hammond, but you're probably teaching students who are around our age and are interested in probably a lot of our interests too. So what are some concerns that you hear from them about their next steps in their career that you're able to answer for us?
Let's see here. Next steps in career. I think like you all mentioned before, like trying to figure out what what to do is one big step. Balance has been a big thing. Mental health has been a big thing over the last few years of students. Like since COVID, I've seen a big shift with that. Students are just, concerned and have a lot of concerns in that area. Are you talking more like career, like bigger career wise than that?
I mean, I've myself started looking at what exactly are the different parts of a clinical program to get your PhD, the steps you have to take. I heard, I think it was Dr. Amy talking about her dissertation, or maybe it was you who the dissertation was hard, just like what are some concerns that
Yeah, like through the way, yeah, certainly like balancing, and Dr. Beck mentioned this too, like through and trying to get, so many of our students are funded, so they're working while they're doing this, but so that's, so like, let's say they have a TA-ship. So how do you balance like doing your assistantship while you're doing your practicum, while you're doing your classes, like how, and then actually like maybe seeing people you care about, being healthy. So that balance in grad school, and then real life stuff happens too, right? So that balance piece has been that I talked to, I mean, literally, I just was talking to some of our fourth year PhD students just this last week. So they're applying for their internships, their fifth year internships. And I mean, they are like glassy eyed, like, because they have so much stuff going on. So I think it's that, and you're at center. So I think, you all have had a heavy load to this point, but it's how do you balance all those things while just what Dr. Beck mentioned in the very beginning, while maintaining this healthy, like, because you have to be able to stay healthy yourself. So, I mean, grad school's tough. It is. It's a lot to balance. So that's the biggest thing. There's so many checkpoints, and and maybe I shouldn't say this to you all now, but I say it to my students, so I'll say it right here. And to me, especially when you're looking at the PhD is a degree of persistence. Um, you are at center, you are bright. So a lot of it is how do I get through all these different checkpoints, all these different things? And it is, can I be persistent? I don't know if you'd agree with that, Dr. Beck. Like um, and so you have to be smart. You have to be able to balance your time. So
I consider graduate school its own form of trauma, which I don't say that to scare people. It's just, it's hard because you are being trained to go care for human beings. You can't be fooling around, right? Like people pay you, right, to make diagnoses, to make recommendations that in a school, in a clinic, that will fundamentally change the trajectory of their lives. You have to know what you're doing, right? And so that's what graduate school is. It is making you, I like to call it making you bulletproof, where you can walk into any situation and know what to do, or at least figure it out. And so it's that teaching you how to think part. And so it's hard. And I would also say too that for a PhD, I think in really most forms of psychology, you have to really want the doctorate. Um, and because with a doctorate, you're more likely to be in academic settings, like an academic hospital in university, doing research, which again falls along the academic kind of trajectory. If that's not something that you're interested in, you can look at master's programs and then sort of just like what Dr. Hammond was talking about, and then go for the PhD later if you want. Like you don't have to go all the way through. Like you can do one piece, kind of look around, reassess, and then finish it on the back half if you want to. Um, and because again, the world really is changing in terms of what is available with all the different levels of these degrees. And so just there's a lot of different ways to get to a similar outcome is kind of what I'm trying to say.
I
Very
appreciate
much
that.
for coming today.
Real quick, can I
You,
just say I appreciated all the questions, and I just thank you all looking for your support systems, like I'm sure you've done now, I think will be really important. So
awesome. Join me in giving them a rousing round of applause. And Dr. Beck and Dr. Hammond, I will be in touch with you very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
thank
guys.
you all. Good luck. Nice meeting you, Dr. Beck.
You too.
Good luck with your new role. Sounds
Oh,
wonderful.
goodness. Thank you. And we have each other's emails so we can be in touch.
Absolutely. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.